We're going to follow the money, housing, debt, wages, policy, and see how a decision in the 1980s opened the trap and 2008 snapped it shut. The blueprint that changed the house. To understand why the dream vanished, we need to go back to the years when it looked real. After World War II, the GI Bill turned signatures into keys. Low-cost mortgages, college seats, starter salaries. Suddenly, a single income could shoulder a house, a car, and a future. Suburbs spread on cheap land, cheap energy, and a quiet pact. As the economy grew, your paycheck would too. Wage growth moved with productivity. Unions bargained. A factory line could lift a family, and one job was enough. Meanwhile, banks were boring by design. Rules walled off gambling from groceries. Savings flowed into mortgages at neighborhood branches. Housing wasn't a global product. It was a place you lived. The system had blind spots. Segregation in loans and neighborhoods wasn't a glitch, it was policy. But for the people let in, the latter felt sturdy. Then the 1970s broke the weather. Oil shocks, prices spiking, unemployment rising. Stagflation upended the promise that you could either have low inflation or high joblessness, but not both. Suddenly we had both. The fix would become the era. The Federal Reserve under Paul Volcker did something simple and brutal: raise interest rates until prices blink. It was a message to the entire economy. Credit would be expensive, money tight, and wages especially would stop chasing prices. Pain wasn't a side effect. It was the plan. Factories closed, mortgages reached double digits, but inflation broke and a new anchor replaced the old one. Before the target had been full employment, a labor market tight enough to give workers leverage. After, the target was price stability, even if that meant slack in the job market. The pivot sounded technical. It was class politics with a spreadsheet. What nobody knew at the time was how this new anchor would tug on everything else. When policy fixates on inflation, it watches wages like a fire hazard. Raise too fast, rates go up, hiring cools, bargaining power slips. Over time, productivity kept rising, but the raise you felt didn't. The gap widened quietly. The surplus went somewhere, just not into paychecks. At the same time, the walls around finance came down. Deregulation loosened lending. The gospel of shareholder primacy rewired corporate goals. Buybacks returned cash to investors instead of plants to workers. Debt stopped being a tool and became a growth model. If earnings didn't move, leverage could. With rates trending down over decades, asset prices learned a new trick. They inflated faster than the incomes trying to buy them. Here's where it gets specific for your street. When money gets cheaper for assets, life gets expensive for people. If you already own, your house appreciates. If you don't, the price runs faster than your raise. Companies could borrow cheaply to buy competitors, factories, or their own stock. Households borrowed on credit cards to buy groceries and on student loans to buy future earnings. Policy applauded the efficiency. Families lived the fragility. Meanwhile, the post-war housing machine, federal guarantees, local builders, steady supply, began to grind. Zoning locked neighborhoods in amber. Environmental reviews stretched years. Infrastructure built for sprawl made proximity a luxury good. And the financial system found a way to turn mortgages into bonds, mortgages into another global product, houses into risk you could trade with a keystroke. That story comes next, but the blueprint started here. Money policy shifted, and housing felt it first. There's a human detail most people forget. In the 1950s, a single income could often qualify for a mortgage because underwriting assumed stability. One job, one breadwinner, one predictable path. By the 1990s and 2000s, the model assumed two incomes. The same house required more people working more hours to meet the same ratios. It looked like progress, more women in the workforce, more earnings, but the system quietly raised the floor on what it took to stand still. The margin, the slack that absorbs shocks, evaporated. While this was happening in boardrooms and central banks, kitchen tables absorbed the downstream effects. A dad took a second shift after health premiums rose. A mom stayed in a job she didn't like because the pension vesting date mattered more than ambition. A raise came through, but daycare went up, then rent, then the car insurance when a nearby flood zone map changed. The math didn't argue, it just tightened. The culture adjusted too. The dream that once meant ownership began to mean access. Lease the car, subscribe to the software, rent the apartment with the gym you'll never use. It felt flexible. It was also a transfer out of equity into monthly fees. For companies, recurring revenue is gold. For households, recurring obligations are a leash. One detail would prove crucial later. Once finance discovered that regular payments from ordinary people could be bundled and sold as safe, the hunt was on for more streams. Mortgages, student loans, medical bills, even rent. When your life becomes a predictable cash flow, someone will package it. The cash flow needs to be reliable, your life doesn't. That tension between stability for investors and volatility for everyone else sits under almost every choice we'll follow. The blueprint that changed the house wasn't a single law or villain. It was a set of priorities: tame inflation at all costs, liberate capital to move faster than labor, treat assets as engines and people as inputs. It delivered cheaper credit for those closest to capital and more expensive living for those closest to bills. And while money policy shifted, a new landlord quietly arrived, not a person, but a market that would turn homes into a ticker symbol. Housing becomes a financial product. See how homes turned into balance sheets. Start with dirt. Land should be simple: buy a lot, build a house, but the rules made scarcity by vote. Single-family zoning carved huge swaths of cities into one house per lot, outlawing duplexes, triplexes, small apartments. Permits crawled, hearings dragged, neighbors vetoed. Every month of delay carried interest, so only bigger players could survive the timeline. Scarcity wasn't an accident. It was engineered, parcel by parcel, meeting by meeting. Meanwhile, the mortgage itself changed shape. A bank used to hold your loan, now it slices it up. Securitization took thousands of home loans, bundled them into mortgage-backed securities, and sold them to investors around the world. The pitch was irresistible. American families pay their mortgages every month, so you get steady cash flows, diversified and rated. What nobody saw at first was how this turned housing into a risk product. When your neighborhood became a component in a global yield hunt, prices started answering to traders as much as to teachers. Global money loved it. Insurance companies in Europe, pension funds in Canada, wealth managers in Asia, all could park capital in U.S. housing risk without ever seeing a cul-de-sac. Demand for these bundles fed the machine that needed more mortgages, which needed more buyers, which needed looser standards and sweeter teasers. Even after the bubble burst, the logic survived. The plumbing stayed. The appetite for yield didn't vanish, it adapted. Then came the new landlord. After 2008, foreclosures piled up in Sunbelt subdivisions. Firms with cash or cheap credit swept courthouse steps, buying in bulk. Private equity vehicles, REITs, and purpose-built single-family rental companies stitched thousands of scattered houses into portfolios. A house that might have sold to a family became a rental with a property manager, a maintenance ticketing system, and a quarterly earnings call. On spreadsheets, streets became rows. In markets where they concentrated, the power imbalance was obvious. You showed up to an open house with a pre-approval letter, they showed up with cash and an algorithm. Bidding wars weren't about charm or letters to sellers. They were about speed. Offers with inspection waivers, 5-day closes, escalation clauses. The human part shrank. The financial part scaled. And algorithms didn't just price houses, they bought them. Models scanned listings, crime stats, school ratings, commute times, estimating rent yields and appreciation curves. If the model hit its hurdle, a bid fired. Ordinary buyers felt like they were arguing with a slot machine that always had more quarters. Losing to a neighbor hurts. Losing to a spreadsheet feels rigged. Supply should have saved buyers. It didn't. After the crash, small builders went bankrupt or left the field, and the survivors were cautious for a decade. Lending to developers tightened. Lumber mills closed. Skilled trades aged. When demand roared back, the pipeline wasn't there. NIMBY fights strangled infill projects. Appeals stretched timelines. Parking minimums ate budgets. Even the homes that got entitled took years to appear. By the time they did, rates or labor costs or insurance had moved again. Meanwhile, rents climbed. A rent burden that used to be 25% of income slid to 30%, then 40% for millions. Young couples put off kids. Roommates stayed roommates. People moved 2-time zones to chase affordability that evaporated on arrival. And when they landed, they found subdivisions owned by corporate landlords with centralized lease terms, standardized fees, and renewal increases tied to market software. The landlord didn't live downstairs. He lived in a data center. Here's the part that stings. Even where institutional owners hold a small national share, their local footprint can punch above its weight. Cluster in the starter home segments of a metro, and you don't need to own everything to set a floor. Comparable sales reflect your cash comps. Appraisers follow the comps. Lenders follow the appraisals. The latter pulls up an inch. Micro story. A nurse in Phoenix toured a 3-bed starter with a patchy lawn and dated cabinets. She ran the numbers tight but doable. That weekend, the listing vanished. An LLC bought it sight unseen, waived contingencies, paid above ask. 2 weeks later, the same house reappeared online with gray paint, vinyl plank, and a rent $700 higher than her old place. She added it to her saved searches anyway. Fees turned up like weeds. Application fees, technology fees, pet rent, smart lock subscriptions. Maintenance backlogs meant weeks without hot water. The call center apologized and created a ticket. If you pushed back, the renewal arrived with a reminder you can always move. Moving costs too. Meanwhile, homeowners watched insurance premiums jump as climate risk got repriced. Flood maps shifted, wildfire zones widened, carriers pulled back. HOA boards cracked down on violations to keep replacement reserves funded. Operating a house looked more like running a small business, with line items for everything and no slack. All this sits on top of the interest rate seesaw. When rates fall, asset prices jump faster than wages. When rates rise, payments spike and inventory freezes. Owners with cheap mortgages stay put. New buyers face higher monthly costs for the same square footage. Sellers don't sell, builders can't pivot fast, renters get no exit. This is how a home turns into a financial product. Land rationed by local vote, mortgages engineered for global appetite, supply throttled by time, and demand armed with cash and code. Families walk into a marketplace, portfolios walk into an asset class. And before you even sign a lease, another bill waits with your name on it, your education. The education debt machine. The pitch sounded noble: invest in yourself. Doors would open. A degree would be the key that couldn't be taken from you. But as homes turned into products, schools learned the same trick. Tuition rose faster than wages year after year, and easy credit filled the gap. Loans weren't just a bridge, they were the business model. Start with the arms race. Employers demanded credentials for jobs that used to train on site. Colleges added programs, centers, amenities, climbing walls, wellness suites, marketing departments, while administrative layers multiplied. Sticker prices soared. Grants and scholarships softened the blow on paper, but the net cost still climbed for huge swaths of students, especially outside the most subsidized programs. Families weren't choosing between school and nothing. They were choosing between debt now or fewer options later. Credit made the choice feel painless. Federal loans were easy to access, interest deferred until after graduation with the promise of manageable payments. Private loans waited in the wings when federal caps ran out. The terms baked in a quiet reality: this debt followed you everywhere. You could discharge credit cards, negotiate a medical bill, even shed a bad business loan in bankruptcy. Student loans stayed. The message: your future income was collateral and the off-ramp was narrow. What nobody admitted in the brochure was who absorbed the risk. Institutions could raise prices knowing aid and loans would chase them. Taxpayers backstopped the system. The borrower, often 18, often the first in the family to navigate this, signed for a sum that didn't feel real yet. Invest in yourself became service the note. This is where the life timeline bends. Buying a home used to depend on savings and a stable paycheck. Now it depended on clearing a debt-to-income ratio that your student loans crowded. Even with income-driven repayment, the monthly drag reduced what a lender would approve. The down payment you were trying to build leaked into minimums. The starter home you toured turned into an email from underwriting. Not at this time. Micro story: a first-gen grad in Ohio took out loans for a state university, finished a business degree, landed a median entry salary. She did everything the counselors said, kept costs down, worked part-time, graduated on time. Her monthly student payment wasn't catastrophic, but it was relentless. Rent took 30%, student loans another 10%, then car insurance, then a medical bill from an urgent care visit with an x-ray she thought was covered. She put $50 a week into a high-yield account for a down payment. At that pace, she'd reach 10% down in 9 years. In year 3, her rent jumped. The account stopped growing. The consequences ripple wider than one budget. Fertility drops when people delay stability. Career choices narrow when graduates can't risk a pay cut to switch fields or take a lower-paid apprenticeship with long-term upside. Regional mobility shrinks when moving for a better job requires covering both rent and loan payments during a transition. The debt becomes a behavioral nudge, pushing people towards safer choices that compound the status quo. Meanwhile, the payment systems turned people into lines of cash flow. Servicers optimized for throughput, not clarity. Auto-pay discounts nudged enrollment. Misapplied payments and paperwork errors lived in phone trees. Deferment and forbearance paused pain but extended timelines, compounding interest into larger balances that felt like treadmill miles. Lots of motion, unmoved distance. Defaults carried teeth. Wage garnishment, tax refund seizures, credit score bruises that raised the cost of everything else. Here's the crucial tension. College still pays on average, especially for those who finish. Degree holders, even after loan payments, tend to out-earn non-completers over a lifetime, but averages hide cliffs. The worst spot is debt without a degree, the payments without the wage bump, and even for completers, the distribution is uneven. Graduate programs drive large balances. Professional degrees can justify them, but many master's programs priced like luxury goods deliver salaries that don't match the note. Administrators can say net prices haven't risen as fast as sticker prices, and there's truth there. Grants matter. But the cultural shift, defaulting to borrowing as the first option, moved risk from institutions to households. That's why we're talking about it here in a story about the middle class, the same logic that securitized mortgages normalized securitized lives. Student payments became predictable streams. Funds bought the bonds. Managers earned fees. The borrower set alarms on their phone. Meanwhile, the promise to fix it arrives in waves. Relief plans, forgiveness programs, new repayment rules. Some help, especially for those in public service or low incomes. But reforms arrive slowly, contested, partial. The pipeline feeding the machine, rising program costs, credential inflation, unrestricted access to non-dischargeable credit, keeps humming. The structure remains. Prices respond to available money, and the money is your future. We should talk about the down payment gap, because it haunts every kitchen table calculation. A couple in their late 20s makes median wages. They're paying rent, covering 2 student loan payments and trying to save. Each rate hike moves the mortgage bar. Each year of waiting sees home prices drift or jump. Even in a cooling market, the monthly math worsens if rates are higher. They're told to cut discretionary spending, but the budget isn't dinners out. It's daycare, car repairs, and the loans they signed at 19. So they delay kids, they delay homes, they delay risk. The middle class gets thinner not through a single crash, but through 1,000 safe decisions made under pressure. The education debt machine didn't just change what people could buy, it changed when they could live. And while you're counting on your paycheck to catch up, something else is quietly happening to that paycheck. Wages, productivity, and the vanishing raise. Meanwhile, the paycheck you're counting on is shrinking in disguise. On paper, the economy keeps getting better at making things. Output per hour climbs, but the raise that used to come along for the ride stopped showing up. Since the late 1970s, productivity and typical pay split. The line that was once braided together unraveled. The extra value created still went somewhere, into profits, into higher pay at the top, into asset prices, but not into most paychecks. This wasn't an accident. When the playbook shifted to treating wage growth as a fire to be doused, bargaining power cooled. Union density fell. Offshoring dangled a quiet threat in every meeting. If you push too hard, the job moves. Automation became the other shadow. Machines don't join unions. Software doesn't take lunch. Even when technology made workers more productive, the share of the gains they kept shrinking. At the same time, the job itself changed shape. The steady, full-time role with benefits turned into hours fed by an app. Gig work promised flexibility. It delivered variable income and costs pushed onto the worker. Health insurance, retirement, the unpaid time between gigs. Algorithmic scheduling shaved minutes off shifts to meet targets. You couldn't plan childcare around a schedule that arrived on Sunday night for Monday morning. The two-income household that looked like a solution turned into its own trap. With both adults working, the family could cover more bills, but the slack disappeared. Childcare costs matched a rent payment. Sick days required logistics. If one income hiccuped, there wasn't a reserve to catch the fall. In the 1950s, a single income bought a house. By the 2000s, two incomes sometimes couldn't rent a two-bedroom in the same zip code where their parents bought. Real wages hid behind headlines. You'd hear about a 3% raise, then watch premiums, deductibles, copays creep higher. Groceries and gas felt sticky. Housing, health, and education did their own inflation dance, fast, relentless. The raise got eaten before it reached the checking account. A bonus covered last year's increase in insurance and the break job you pushed into next month. Here's the quiet part. Employers learn to pay with perks and volatility. Unlimited PTO in jobs where taking it risks promotion. Equity grants in startups that shift risk to workers. Contract to hire arrangements that never convert. The spreadsheet looks efficient, the household looks brittle. When hours vary, the budget becomes a guess. Late fees and overdrafts step in as a penalty for guessing wrong. Outsourcing pulled on the thread from the other end. Manufacturing towns watched plants close and reopen abroad, then saw the same playbook in services. Back-office roles moved to lower-cost markets. Customer support crossed oceans. The story wasn't evil, just arithmetic. Cheaper inputs, higher margins, happier shareholders. But every time the spreadsheet found a savings, a community lost its anchor employer, and the new jobs that arrived paid less with thinner benefits. Micro story: a warehouse supervisor in Ohio earned just enough to make the rent, the truck, the phone, and the food work. His company rolled out a new scheduling system that optimized labor to demand. Hours swung from 42 to 28 without warning. He grabbed a delivery app to fill the gap. Tires wore faster. The check that looked whole on Friday had been bought with sleep and tread, and next month's budget already assumed both would stretch again. The impact of this isn't theoretical. Emergency savings thin to almost nothing. A furnace dies, a kid needs stitches, a parent needs a flight. One shock and the card fills the hole, then interest fills your next month. That's the design of a system where income volatility meets fee-based finance. When wages stall, debt steps in. When debt steps in, tomorrow's wages are already spent. Meanwhile, performance metrics crept into every role. You're measured constantly, compared constantly, nudged constantly. Hit your numbers or your hours shrink. Miss your numbers and your job posts quietly with a new title. Even inside stable companies, contractors sit next to employees doing the same work for less money and no benefits. The message lands: you can be replaced. The raise becomes gratitude for still being here. There are bright spots in tight labor markets. When unemployment falls low enough, wages at the bottom rise fastest. Signing bonuses pop up in places that never offered them. But it's episodic, and policy slams the brakes when signs of wage growth show up as inflation risk. The cycle teaches caution. Workers don't negotiate hard when the next rate hike might tip a slowdown. So households adapt. They stack income, second jobs, side gigs, weekend shifts. They learn the cadence of cash flow like a drummer: rent on the 1st, loan on the 15th, utilities floating around both. They hold breath through the 5 days between deposits. They delay dental visits. They cancel subscriptions and then re-add them when a promo code appears. It's not a plan, it's triage. This is the moment everything upstream makes sense. Productivity rises, the gains go elsewhere. Benefits vanish, costs show up at your door, schedules flex, lives rigidify. The vanishing raise isn't just smaller money, it's less control over time, less margin for error, and more dependence on credit to bridge the gaps that used to be covered by a predictable paycheck. And once debt becomes the bridge, the next act writes itself. The debt economy becomes the economy.